Hi guys, my name is Dr. Eniela, and welcome to Be That Girl. So today we are talking about something that's a little bit heavier, but still going to be our usual 20-minute tops. It's not going to be too long, but I'm talking about emotional wounds and mental health. If you've bought my book or if you've read my book, I really have a whole chapter about this, and I think it's extremely important as people, human beings, as women, as men, anybody, making sure that even though we're physically okay, we should also be emotionally okay. And coming from the type of culture I come from, we don't usually take emotions very seriously. However, there's a high suicide rate among young people, even in Nigeria that I come from. So I think it's extremely important. And God also sees an importance in it. So I'm going to start with what I usually start with. And I talk about it also in the book. And if you have listened to me, this is how I usually start. And I talk about it with kind of Googling what does wound mean? Like, what does wound, when you Google it and when you Wikipedia it, it says it's an injury to a living tissue caused by cut, blow, or other impact, typically one in which skin is cut or broken. And if you take it to the emotional aspect, an injury, a wound or emotional wound is an injury to a heart caused by cut, blow, or other impact, typically which the heart is cut or broken, right? And so they're different. I think I'm going to be a little bit anatomical or physiological or medical. And so there's actually a whole section or area of medicine called wound care medicine where people actually deal with wounds and how wounds heal and come up with treatment plans for wounds. And physically, I think the same thing that happens physically really is what happens emotionally. So there are different types of physical wounds, right? There are small cuts that you can just put antiseptic on, put a plaster, and you're on your way. There are other type of cuts that you might have to sew back together, still put it back your way. There are also deep cuts that it might take some cleaning, but you put it back. There are some cuts that you actually have to go to surgery. It's called a debridement, where they go and clean the wound and then they cover it. There's some cuts that they can't even cover it after it happens. They put something called a wound vac, which removes all the gunk and the blood over a period of time. Then they remove the wound vac. Later, they go back in surgery and close the wound. So physical wounds can be very, very complex. And I think sometimes we do not understand that when people have emotional wounds or emotional woundedness, it can also be very complex. The danger of this is the enemy knows our weak points. It's a big, big, big liability or weak point when you haven't dealt with your emotional woundedness. There's no way those wounds will not come out. And where it usually comes out as seen in women, it will come out in relationships, in male relationships, because there's a way when you are in female relationships, and also because women tend to understand women and feel their emotional needs. When you're with your girls, they'll say things that encourage you, they will love on you, they give you what you need. But it's with with a guy that is not exactly the same as you, that emotional woundedness will come out in one way or another. Even if it actually will sometimes come out in female friendships, depending on the level of the wound. We have to take care of our emotional woundedness because I say this weird. Sometimes we walk around like the walking wounded. Like we're wounded and we're walking and we're looking as if doing well in life. But truly, truly, God knows that we're not really doing that well. And in one way or another, these things come out. And so there are different levels or different cuts or blows or things that can happen to you. So I have different categories. Rejection is a big, broad category. Rejection in the form of bullying when you're young, rejection in the form of social stratification when you're not accepted to a certain group. I think sociologically, physiologically, psychosociologically, every person wants to be accepted, loved, celebrated. This is an innate need in all of us. This need, I have to tell you, goes back to us when they say we were cavemen, but if you think about it, if you are in this type of societies and you're not love protected, accepted, there's a tendency that you're going to die out, right? You're going to be caught by a tiger or the neighboring village that is at war with you. So these are very base human needs. And so rejection, even though sometimes we tend to go past it, is a big psychological wound that can happen. Words can hurt. Words from loved ones, words from authority figures, words for people that we respect and honor, and they say these words to us. That words that sticks and stones were hurt, but words don't hurt. So that is not true. Words are extremely, extremely powerful. Words can change the spiritual environment around somebody. Somebody will hear something long enough, they begin to believe it, and they begin to think like it. And once they begin to think like that, just things will begin to happen to them. That's how powerful words are. And then when you have major abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse by loved ones, but even sometimes is by truants or, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think more importantly, most abuse happens from somebody that you know. And so it's a higher weight of that level of betrayal. It creates a wound. And then emotional abuse in relationships, it can happen with parents, with our parents, and manipulation. It affects your self-esteem, it affects your confidence, and you carry those wounds with you, and you're not even aware of those wounds that you have. And so it's a wide range of things, that can cause these cuts and blows to you. One category I'm going to talk about, especially for women, is father's rejection. Rejection is a broad category, you know. But a father's rejection is a very huge wound for women. And one thing I've found is that it either makes you look for that love in the wrong places or reject that love in the right places. Again, it makes you look for that love in the wrong places or reject that love in the right places because you don't know what love is, right? Because when you're born as a woman, as a girl, who is that example of a father, of a man to you, of the role of a man, of what he should do, of how he should be with his wife? Is going to be your dad. But your dad isn't around. He has rejected you. There's no way, this is basically where you come from. There's no way you're not going to have a wound of rejection when you're rejected from where you literally came from. And so this is a big category of emotional woundedness for a lot of women. I cannot I, I cannot even say that there's any woman that I think for me, my own would have been they'll ask me 10 years ago, they're probably like, oh, no, I don't really care. He wasn't in my life, blah, blah, blah. However, you know, thinking about it, looking at the actions I made in relationship, looking at the choices I made, I found out like this rejection wound was there. It was really the catalyst for a lot of choices. And what really I should have done was acknowledged it. So it goes back to what are we going to do? We know about this emotional woundedness. Let's go back to what are the steps for healing? Acknowledgement. I always say the worst disease or condition to treat is the unacknowledged one. If you do not acknowledge what you have, you cannot treat it. The more importantly for emotional wounds, because I always say that physical wounds, everybody sees them. Physical ailments, most of the time we can see them or we can see the consequences of them eventually. But when you have an emotional wound that you're able to, especially if you're a type A personality, go personality, and you're getting accolades, going further in life, graduating from school, looking like you're doing well, these things can be hidden until it's like a ticking time bomb, and the enemy looks at you, watching you, knows that thing is there, and he waits for the right opportunity to kind of like detonate the bomb. So you have to acknowledge that you have a wound. So sometimes, however, you don't even know you have a wound. What are signs of knowing of emotional weakness? One sign I see is when you react instead of responding, or overreaction to certain things. The only example I can say is that if you have a cut on your hand or if you're burnt on your hand and somebody grabs that hand very, very tightly, right? You're going to scream, what was this? What usually my hand is hurt? As opposed to if your hand is fine, somebody grabs your hand, you're like, oh, okay. That's what the overreaction is. When you see small actions make you react with emotions, with anger, with rage, you begin to see that, okay, this is not normal. When you react instead of responding to things, that is a signal to you that, okay, there might be a wound here. Now, repeated patterns and words. If you're in this relationship, you have to watch yourself in relationships. If you see that I'm in this relationship and this happened, this relationship has happened. I ain't gonna lie to you people. For me, Sha, I just used to say that I was just my mouth was very sharp. There were certain words I used to use, and I just said, these people do this. It's not as if these guys came together and said, "Oh, let's do a conference so Enila can be annoyed and say these words." Why am I saying these words over and over again? And these were disrespectful words I don't want to say in public. So look into yourself. What are the repeated words? What are the repeated patterns or repeated broken relationships? I always say this: first time is snake, second time is a pattern, third time is traditional culture. It's you that's the problem. You have to sit down and say, okay, what is wrong with me that these things are happening to me? What I tend to see, especially also with cancel culture or social media culture, is people tend not to take tend not to take responsibility for their actions. Either, this term of narcissism is a narcissist, or this happened or that happened. Why is it only you that attracts narcissists? You have to think about those things. Why you only you that attracts Yoruba demons? Things like that. You have to ask yourself the hard questions. You cannot keep on blaming people for repeated patterns you're seeing in your life. And don't get me wrong, if you can be hurt, people can do you wrong. That's what is evil. Not everybody is kind, and everybody has the spirit of God in them. People can do you wrong. But if you see certain things happening to you over and over again, there's usually an aspect of you that's allowing that door to be opened. Also, caveat is also there's also sometimes a spiritual aspect of things. Um, what the Holy Spirit is reminding me of is abuse. Some people tend to see that they are abused repeatedly. That can be spiritual. That don't put that on yourself. But ask those questions, whatever it is, caused whether spiritual or physical or a carnal character issue. All the answers are found in God. The second step I would say is, you pray for healing. Once you have acknowledged and recognized, is praying for healing. Praying for healing, God wants our souls to prosper just as we also prosper. So He wants us to prosper emotionally, physically, spiritually. Yep, it's different facets of prosperity. And I think God really wants us to prosper. So using those words of healing, I'm telling you guys my process. I had to pray for healing, emotional healing, any way that I do not even know that there are wounds. God, heal me from father's rejection, heal me from, humans' rejection, heal me from the things that I've imbibed. So it's very important you pray for healing, but not also healing. There's also the physical aspect of emotional woundedness and healing. Get a professional's help. Talk to a therapist. There's so many Instagram therapists. Choose one that you think sounds okay. And I used to say something, you make sure you find a Christian therapist. I don't really. No, I think therapy is therapy, right? Unless it's overtly against the word, or unless it's telling you to sin and it's a sin. I don't think you necessarily need to find a Christian therapist, but you do need to find somebody that can talk to you. And what therapy really usually does is acknowledge the problems, and then it teaches you tools for how to deal with those problems, and then moves you to healing. Another thing that you also have to know is that healing takes work. Time doesn't heal all wounds, whether physical or emotional. Work heals wounds, and sometimes the healing processes of these wounds are even harder than the wound process itself. It's folk telling you to look at yourself and look at your mistakes and look at your woundedness and look at your hurt. And sometimes it's not the easiest things to do. So it's extremely, extremely important that you do the work of healing and take the steps of healing. And then there are individualized dealings that God will tell you to do in terms of your healing. That's why prayer is important. For me, it was service. There's this Bible passage that says, "He that waters will also be watered." And I found out, like, when I prayed or ministered to people, those emotional woundedness, those areas of my life were not as glaring. It was as if I was getting my healing from speaking and talking to people and doing, basically living in service. So those are personalized dealings. I'm not telling anybody here that if you're wounded or you recognize emotional woundedness, you should go and serve in your church or whatever God has called you to do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are sometimes personalized dealings that are specific to you that God will tell you to do. that will mold you towards healing. So I don't think this is exhaustive at all. I'm quite sure that, if I don't remember anything, I could talk about it again. But it's such a broad topic, such a huge topic. And I think that talking about it, or even acknowledging it, is usually this right step in healing. So if you've noticed anything of this in yourself, acknowledge it to yourself first, then acknowledge it to God. And that is really just your step towards healing. And then learn other patterns of behavior, because these emotional wounds change you. The only example I can give the physical example of, if your leg is cut, or if your finger has cut, and you're still going on with life. People learn how to live with one limb. People learn how to live with their fingers cut. So in the same way, emotionally, we learn how to live with these wounds, but they're not actually normal. They're not actually God's plan for us. So my prayer for everybody listening or watching is that we go to original design and God's plan for us, and that as Christ died for our physical wounds and cancers and hypertension and people looking at those big broad categories, Christ also died for the emotional woundedness, the rejection, the loss, the pain, the assaults, anything that has happened that has created wounds in you. Christ has died for it, and He will be there to heal you. So I think it's a kind of heavy topic this episode. That wasn't my intention, but thank you guys for listening, and remember, you're that girl.